There is a version of you that existed before the world got its hands on you. You felt it once, maybe as a child, maybe in a rare, unguarded moment as an adult, that quiet but unmistakable sense of knowing who you were without needing anyone to confirm it. It was not arrogance, it was not naivety, it was something more fundamental than either of those things. It was the experience of being present to yourself before the accumulated weight of other people's expectations, other people's fears, other people's definitions of what a person is supposed to be, before all of that landed on you and slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shape you into something more manageable, more predictable, more acceptable to the world around you. And somewhere along the way, you began to lose the thread. Not all at once. That is never how it happens. It happens in small moments, small surrenders. The time you said something true and the room went quiet in a way that told you truth was not welcome here. The time you chose something that felt right to you and were made to feel selfish, irresponsible, strange. The time you expressed a desire, a vision, a way of being in the world. And it was met not with curiosity, but with gentle correction. And then less gentle correction, until you learned to correct yourself before anyone else had to bother. You became efficient at self-erasure. You became fluent in the language of other people's comfort. What I want to explore with you today is not a self-help prescription for how to reclaim yourself. I'm not going to give you 5 steps or a morning routine or a journaling prompt that unlocks your authentic self, like a password to a forgotten account. What I want to do is something harder and more important. I want to think seriously with you about what actually happened, why the world so consistently tries to stop certain people from becoming who they are, and what it genuinely costs to begin living as though you have the right to exist on your own terms. Because I think you deserve more than motivation. I think you deserve understanding. And understanding, real understanding, is the only thing that actually changes anything. Hannah Arendt, who spent her life thinking about what it means to be a free human being in a world that perpetually pressures conformity, wrote something that I return to again and again. She observed that every person who enters the world brings with them a kind of radical newness, what she called natality. The simple fact that you were born, that you arrived, that something genuinely unprecedented entered existence in the form of you. This is not poetry. This is philosophy in the most serious sense. She meant that every human being carries within them the capacity to begin something that has never existed before. Not because they are exceptional in the conventional sense, not because they are gifted or talented or chosen, but simply because they are a new person, a new perspective, a new way of being present to the world. No one has ever been you before. No one will ever be you again. And the world, for reasons we will examine carefully, has enormous difficulty tolerating that fact. If what I'm saying is already touching something in you, something that has been waiting a long time to be named, I want you to consider subscribing to this channel. I make these explorations every week, not as answers, but as genuine attempts to think through what it means to live as a conscious human being in a world that would often prefer you did not. There is a community here of people who take these questions seriously, and I would be honored to have you among them. Now let us return to the world's discomfort with your originality, because understanding that discomfort is the beginning of freedom from it. What Arendt understood, and what most of us only sense dimly at first, is that human societies require a certain degree of predictability to function. People need to be able to anticipate how others will behave. Institutions need to be able to categorize their members. Families need their members to fit into roles that the family system can accommodate. Communities need their participants to reflect back a shared set of values, a shared set of acceptable ways to exist. None of this is necessarily malicious. Most of it is not. The pressure to conform that you have felt throughout your life did not usually come from people who woke up deciding to crush your spirit. It came from people who were themselves shaped, molded, constrained, and who genuinely believe, in many cases, that what they are offering you is help, safety, belonging, a roadmap to a life that works. The problem is not that the world wants coherence. The problem is what gets sacrificed in the process of providing it. And what gets sacrificed consistently, predictably, is precisely the thing that is most distinctively yours, your actual way of seeing, your actual way of feeling, your actual way of understanding what matters and why. These things, because they are genuinely yours, do not fit neatly into pre-existing categories. They resist easy classification. They create friction. And friction in most social environments is experienced as a problem to be solved, rather than a signal to be understood. I know many of you watching this have been carrying the weight of this friction for a very long time. You have felt it in your relationships, in your work, in your family, in the quiet of your own mind, when you wonder why becoming yourself feels like such an act of resistance. You may never have spoken about this directly. You may have found ways to explain it to yourself that are kinder to the people who shaped you, or perhaps harsher to yourself than the situation warrants. But here, in this space, I want to ask you something directly. When did you first sense that who you actually were was not quite what the world around you needed you to be? When did you first notice the gap between how you felt on the inside and what you understood was expected of you on the outside? You do not have to have a dramatic answer. For many people, it is not a single moment, but an accumulation. A long, slow realization that living in good faith with yourself and living in good standing with the world around you were pulling in different directions. If that is your experience, if you have been quietly navigating that tension for years, I want you to share that in the comments below. How long have you been carrying this? You do not need elaborate words. If it feels difficult to articulate, just type, "I have been here too." Just that. Because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not alone in this specific and often unspeakable experience. Your honesty creates permission for others to be honest, and that matters more than you might realize. Let us go deeper now, because I think there is something important that does not get said clearly enough in conversations about authenticity and self-realization. The world does not only pressure you from the outside. By the time you are an adult, a significant portion of the suppression is happening entirely within you, in the form of internalized voices, internalized standards, internalized judgments that feel so native to your own thinking that you no longer recognize them as borrowed. You believe you are thinking your own thoughts when you are actually running a very sophisticated program that was installed long before you had the capacity to consent to its installation. This is not a metaphor for the sake of drama. It is a description of how human beings actually develop. We absorb the values, the fears, the limitations, and the permissions of the people around us before we have any philosophical tools to evaluate them. And then we spend the rest of our lives, if we are fortunate enough to become conscious of this process at all, trying to distinguish what we actually think and feel and want from what we were taught to think and feel and want. Arendt had a concept that is useful here, though she applied it in a different context. She spoke of thoughtlessness, not stupidity, not ignorance, but the specific failure to think, to stop, and genuinely examine what one is doing and why. She applied this concept to some of the most disturbing phenomena in human history, but the underlying insight applies at the level of individual life with equal force. Most of us, most of the time, are not actually thinking about our lives. We are executing patterns. We are following scripts. We are performing roles that were handed to us and that we accepted without examination, because examining them felt dangerous or overwhelming, or simply because no one ever suggested that examination was possible. The version of you that the world tried to stop from existing is often stopped not by active opposition, but by the simple, relentless machinery of thoughtlessness. You stop yourself before anyone else has to. Consider what this means practically. You have an impulse, a genuine movement towards something, a way of wanting to spend your time, a way of wanting to relate to people, a vision of what a meaningful life might look like for you specifically. And before that impulse can even fully form into a thought, something else activates. A counter voice, an objection, a preemptive judgment that sounds like reason, but is actually fear wearing the costume of wisdom. That voice tells you it is not practical. That voice tells you you are being selfish. That voice tells you people like you do not do things like that, or that it is too late, or that you are not qualified, or that you will fail, or that you will succeed and lose the people who currently love you, or some other concern that, when examined closely, turns out to belong to someone else entirely. Some worry that was deposited in you by a parent, a teacher, a culture, a religion, a social class, a gender expectation. The voice sounds like you, but it is not you. It is the world, internalized. It is the pressure that has been so thoroughly absorbed that it no longer requires an external source. The first act of becoming who you are, therefore, is not a dramatic declaration or a radical break. It is something much quieter and more demanding. It is the act of beginning to notice the difference between your own thinking and the borrowed thinking you have been mistaking for your own. This is what Arendt called the life of the mind, and she considered it one of the most genuinely radical acts available to a human being. Not activism in the streets, though that has its place, but the internal act of actually stopping, withdrawing from the automatic flow of inherited assumption, and asking, what do I actually think? What do I actually feel? What do I actually want? Beneath the want to be acceptable, beneath the want to be approved of, beneath the want to fit into the story that the people around me need me to fit into. This is not as simple as it sounds. When you begin to genuinely examine the assumptions you have been living by, you will often find that they are not just uncomfortable to question, they are terrifying. Because they are not merely beliefs, they are the architecture of the relationships that have sustained you. They are the foundation of the identity you have built. They are the operating system of your social world. To question them is not just to think differently, it is to risk the entire structure. And this is why the world succeeding in stopping so many people from becoming themselves has nothing to do with malevolence, and everything to do with the way love and belonging get weaponized, often unconsciously, in the service of conformity. We stop ourselves from becoming who we are not because we are cowards, though fear is certainly present, but because the cost of becoming is genuinely high, and we are not wrong to notice that. Here is where I want to offer a reframing that I think changes everything. The conventional narrative about authenticity, about becoming yourself, treats it primarily as a process of self-discovery. You dig inside, you find the true you express it. Done. But this model misses something essential. It treats the self as a fixed object waiting to be uncovered rather than what it actually is, which is something that comes into being through action, through relationship, through the act of speaking and doing in the world among other people. Arendt was insistent on this. The self is not a pre-existing entity that you find. The self is something that you reveal through your choices, your words, your commitments, your actions. You do not discover who you are and then live accordingly. You live in certain ways, and through the living you become. This distinction matters enormously because it changes what becoming yourself actually requires. It is not primarily an inner process of excavation, it is an outer process of action, taken in the face of real risk. You have to actually do the things that are genuinely yours to do, even without certainty, even without permission, even without a guarantee that the world will receive them well. And you have to do them in the world among other people, in the space that Arendt called the space of appearance. The realm where what you do and say becomes real, because it is witnessed, because it enters the shared world and can no longer be taken back. This is why becoming yourself cannot happen in private alone. It requires the courage to appear, to let yourself be seen doing and saying things that are genuinely yours rather than performed for the comfort of others. And it requires tolerating with as much grace as you can manage the fact that some people will not like what they see. Some people will be disturbed by it. Some people, the ones who needed you to remain small and predictable and comfortably familiar, will experience your emergence as a loss or even as a betrayal. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it is one of the things that most people do not tell you about the process of becoming yourself. And its omission does real harm. The people who tried to stop you from being who you are, whether they did it consciously or not, whether they did it out of fear or out of love or out of both simultaneously, often truly needed you to remain who they needed you to be. Your change will cost them something. Your freedom will require them to adjust, to grieve, to question their own choices. Some will do this, and the relationship will survive and even deepen. Others will not. And this is not a reason to remain who you are not, but it is something you deserve to understand clearly before you begin, rather than something you discover with shock and guilt when it is already happening. People who love you will sometimes do everything in their power to keep you from growing, because your growth confronts them with the growth they have not allowed themselves. This is not cruelty, it is pain. But understanding it as pain rather than authority changes your relationship to it entirely. If what I'm exploring here is touching something real in you, I want to invite you into this community more fully. The questions I am working through in these videos, about consciousness, about the cost of genuine living, about what it actually takes to inhabit your own existence rather than the one you were assigned. These are questions I take more seriously than anything else I could spend my time on. If you are someone who has been searching for a space where these questions are taken seriously, where you are not offered easy answers but genuine thought, then I want you to subscribe. Not for my sake, though I am glad when this work reaches people who need it, but for yours, because the journey of becoming yourself is not one that benefits from isolation. There are others walking this same difficult road, asking these same questions, navigating these same costs. This channel exists to be a companion for that journey. So if this feels like your kind of place, stay, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what in this particular exploration has landed most deeply for you. I read everything that is shared here, and your reflections consistently enrich my own thinking in ways I could not anticipate. Now let us continue, because I think the most important thing I want to say is still ahead. There is a particular cruelty in the way the world stops certain people from becoming themselves, and it has nothing to do with overt opposition. It is subtler than that. It operates through the mechanism of making the cost of authenticity feel personal, as though the difficulty you experience in becoming yourself is evidence of something wrong with you, rather than something wrong with the social arrangement. You are anxious, you are too sensitive, you are impractical, you are unrealistic, you are selfish, you are difficult. These are the judgments that land not as observations about your choices, but as diagnoses of your character. And because they come from people whose approval you were taught to need, you absorb them. You begin to believe that the reason becoming yourself is hard is because you are not quite right, not quite capable, not quite enough. You do not recognize that what you are actually experiencing is the natural and inevitable friction of a genuinely new person trying to exist in a world that has very specific and limited ideas about what kinds of people are permitted to take up space. Arendt wrote about plurality, about the fact that the human world is a world of many different people, each genuinely distinct, each bringing something unprecedented into existence simply by being alive. She considered this plurality not an inconvenience to be managed, but the fundamental condition of political life, of shared life, of genuine relationship. The world is enriched by difference. The presence of someone who sees differently, who feels differently, who chooses differently, who lives by a genuinely different set of priorities. This is not a problem for healthy communities. It is the condition of their vitality. Uniformity is not strength. It is brittleness. A world in which everyone thinks the same thoughts and wants the same things and lives by the same values is not a peaceful world. It is a dead one. When the world tried to stop you from becoming who you are, it was acting against its own deepest interests, though it did not know it. The pressure toward conformity is always, on some level, an expression of fear, the fear of what cannot be predicted, the fear of what challenges existing arrangements, the fear of genuine freedom in another person, which necessarily reminds those who have surrendered their freedom of what they have given up. This is why the people who push back most forcefully against your emergence are often not the people who never wanted more for themselves, but the people who did want more and decided at some point that it was not possible. Your possibility confronts their resigned impossibility, and that confrontation is genuinely painful for them. Understanding this does not mean accepting their opposition as legitimate. It means meeting it with clarity rather than guilt. Clarity is what I want to offer you, because I think it is the thing that is most often missing from conversations about self-realization. We talk about courage, and courage is real and necessary. We talk about healing, and healing is real and necessary. But underneath all of that, what actually makes becoming possible is understanding. When you understand clearly what happened to you, when you understand the mechanisms by which you were shaped and constrained, when you understand the specific pressures of the specific world you grew up in and the specific fears that drove the people who shaped you, You stop taking it personally in the way that keeps you stuck. You stop believing that the smallness you were offered was deserved. You stop performing the role of someone who is too much, or not enough or wrong in some fundamental way that needs correcting before they can be permitted to exist freely. You recognize that what happened was not about you. It was about the world's limited capacity to tolerate what you genuinely are. And once you recognize that, once it lands in you not as an idea but as a lived understanding, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but meaningfully. You begin to relate to the internal voices differently. When the voice says you cannot do this, you begin to ask whose voice that actually is. When the pressure to shrink yourself activates, you begin to notice it as pressure rather than truth. When the fear of other people's discomfort arises, you begin to distinguish it from the actual danger it once represented. Because when you were a child, the discomfort of the people who had power over you was genuinely dangerous. Their withdrawal of approval was genuinely threatening to your survival. You were right to be afraid. You were right to adapt. You were not wrong to become whoever you needed to become in order to belong to the world you were born into. That was not weakness, that was intelligence in the service of survival. But you are not a child anymore. And the survival strategies of childhood, carried intact into adult life, become the walls of a prison you cannot see because you built it yourself, block by block, in the dark, before you knew what you were building. Becoming who you are is, in part, the work of recognizing that the walls are there, understanding why you built them, and then deciding with the full consciousness of an adult who has a choice, whether they still serve you. Some of them do. Some of the adaptations you made were not just survivalist, but genuinely wise. You learned things, you developed capacities, you built empathy through the experience of having to navigate worlds that were not designed for you. The person you became in response to the world's constraints is not simply a corrupted version of who you would have been without them. Experience shapes us, and shaping is not only loss. There is something in you that was forged precisely by the pressure you faced, and that forging has its own value. The work is not to demolish who you have become, but to examine it, to keep what is genuinely yours and genuinely good, and to let go, as consciously and deliberately as you can, of what was borrowed, imposed, and is no longer serving the life you are actually trying to live. Natality, for Arendt, was not a nostalgic concept. She was not asking us to return to some original and uncorrupted self that existed before experience touched us. She was pointing to something more radical and more present tense than that. She was saying that the capacity to begin, the capacity to do something new, to initiate something that has not existed before, is not something that happened once at birth and then closed. It is a permanent feature of human existence. Every moment is, in some sense, a moment in which something new can begin. The past is real, its weight is real, the shaping it did is real, but it does not determine the future with the finality that fear would have you believe. You can begin, not by escaping who you have been, but by choosing from within who you have been to move differently, to say something true, to do something genuinely yours, to let yourself appear in the world as what you actually are, rather than what you have been performing. This is not a romantic vision, it is a demanding one. Beginning again, even in small ways, even in the specific and limited ways that are available to any given person in any given moment, is hard. It requires accepting that you will not do it perfectly, that you will sometimes slip back into the familiar patterns, that the new will sometimes feel more frightening than the old, even when the old was clearly insufficient. Growth is not a linear, upward trajectory. It is recursive, irregular, sometimes baffling. There will be days when you seem further from yourself than you were before you started paying attention. That is not failure, that is the nature of genuine development, which requires disruption before it achieves integration. What I want you to hold on to through all of it is the fundamental rightness of the endeavor, not in a moral sense that judges other people for not undertaking it, or yourself for taking as long as you have, but in the sense that there is something genuinely important at stake when a person commits to living as what they actually are. Arendt believed that freedom was not a private possession, but something that showed itself in the world between people, in the space of genuine action and genuine speech. When you become more fully yourself, When you let what is genuinely yours appear in the shared world, you are not just doing something for yourself. You are contributing something real to the world. You are adding to the plurality that makes genuine human community possible. You are demonstrating, by living it, that a person can exist on their own terms. And that demonstration, however quietly it happens, however privately it begins, has consequences that extend beyond you in ways you cannot predict and may never fully know. There have always been people who refuse to become what the world tried to make them. Not all of them are famous. Most of them are ordinary people who at some point simply decided, consciously or not, to stop betraying themselves in the small daily ways that add up over a lifetime to a complete abandonment of who they were. They kept a practice the world told them was impractical. They ended a relationship the world told them they should maintain. They said something true in a room where the truth was not welcome. They chose work that mattered to them over work that impressed others. They gave themselves permission, slowly and imperfectly, to exist as what they actually were. And in doing so, they became, for the people around them who were watching, proof that it was possible. Proof that the constraints were not absolute. Proof that the world's definition of who you were allowed to be was not the only definition available. You can be that for someone else, but only if you are willing to be it for yourself first. If you have stayed with me through this entire exploration, I want you to know that I see the quality of attention it takes to engage seriously with these questions. Most people do not. Most people prefer content that confirms what they already believe, that makes them feel good without requiring them to actually think. You are not that person. You came here because something in you knows that the examination matters, that understanding matters, that being willing to look clearly at what has happened to you and what it would take to live differently is not indulgent, but necessary. This channel exists for you specifically, for the people who are ready to go deeper than comfort allows, who are willing to trade easy answers for genuine understanding, who believe that becoming themselves is worth the cost. If that is you, please subscribe, and more importantly, stay in conversation. Share your experience in the comments. Tell me where you are in this process, what feels most true, what feels most difficult. I read every comment. Your reflections consistently deepen my own thinking, and the community that forms in these conversations is one of the most genuinely meaningful things I have encountered in this work. So if this feels like your place, make it your place. I want to close by returning to where we began. There is a version of you that existed before the world got its hands on you, and here is what I want you to understand, perhaps for the first time. That version of you did not disappear. It was not destroyed by the shaping, the constraining, the adapting that you have done. It went somewhere quieter, somewhere more protected, somewhere beneath the accumulated weight of everything you had to become in order to survive. It has been waiting, not with resentment, not with urgency, but with the patience of something that knows it is real, and that reality does not ultimately require the world's permission to assert itself. The question that remains is not whether that self exists. It does. The question is whether you are ready, in whatever small and specific way is available to you right now, to let it appear, to let it be seen, to let it act, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. Because genuinely is the only way it has ever been possible, and you have been capable of genuinely for longer than you know.